Okay, so Trevor Lawrence announcing last night after the team announced it, after reports emerged that he's tested positive for COVID-19. The team says he has mild symptoms. Lawrence says he has relatively mild symptoms. I don't know the difference between the two. The bottom line is he's got symptoms. He's out for a minimum of 10 days, according to ACC rules, which track current CDC guidelines. Now, this is where it gets a little vague, a little fuzzy, and the potential is there for it to get creative from Clemson's standpoint as it relates to a counting of days standpoint, Peter, because reportedly, and this comes from Pat Forty of SI.com, the sample that tested positive was collected Wednesday morning. So 10 days from that is Saturday morning, the morning of the game against Notre Dame next weekend. Obviously, he won't play this week against Boston College. They don't need him against Boston College. They need him against Notre Dame. I saw a tweet from Adam Schefter last night that the symptoms may have started before he gave the sample, and by CDC guidelines, the 10-day clock starts to run from when you started to have symptoms. So fuzzy math, creative accounting, whatever the case may be. Hey, when did you first have symptoms? And once you understand how the counting works, well, I had the symptoms. At first I really wasn't feeling like myself, let's say 2 weeks ago. The whole thing invites skepticism and scrutiny because the NCAA, by all appearances, has gone AWOL on this. The conferences aren't going to do anything that are going to hurt the broader interests of the schools. The schools are going to do what they want to do, and the kids ultimately want to play. So it's easy to justify doing whatever it takes to get him back on the field. As long as he doesn't have a fever or some other obvious symptom, I'd be stunned if he's not on the field next Saturday.
Mike, in my column on Monday, I highlighted a story from the New York Times about Nick Saban's positive COVID test and what exactly happened after he tested positive. And as you recall, Nick Saban had to test negative 3 times, 3 consecutive days, before he was allowed to coach on the sidelines in that Saturday night's game, when they were going to play Georgia. Okay, so it was going to be really close. He was going to have to test on Saturday morning. And so what did Alabama do? Alabama took the test tube with his swab and with his nasal mucus, whatever that's called, okay, his effluents. And they took the test tube. They put the test tube on a private jet. And the private jet flew to Mobile, Alabama, where the test was examined and where it was determined that, after however long I don't know whether this was a point of care or whether it was the POC, the longer, more conclusive test. Whichever one it was, test comes back early afternoon. You're in the clear, Nick. You've had 3 consecutive days of negative testing, so you can coach. So, Mike, listen, all I can say is I started to do the math on Trevor Lawrence when I heard this last night, and then I heard about the 10-day thing. Okay, so I don't know anything about when you first feel symptoms or anything like that, but it's definitely possible for him, if he tests negative on Saturday morning on the 10th day, it's very possible for him just to get in. How many private jets do you think the Clemson football program has at its instant disposal? Probably quite a few of them. Be what, an hour and a half from Clemson to South Bend on private plane? He can have a nice little breakfast, nice little team meal on the way, walks out, and here comes Superman to quarterback against the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and I hate to be so cynical about it, but we've seen this time and again, especially when it comes to college football, they're going to get these guys on the field. There isn't that broader sense of order and limitations and regulations that the NFL has in place for its franchises. The NFL isn't going to hesitate to say to various guys, you're not available all week to practice or for the game, and if it creates a competitive disadvantage, so be it. Our primary commitment is to keep this virus out of our facilities and away from people that it could harm. College football has found a way to justify playing this game of multiple negative tests or right up against the deadline, whatever the deadline may be, all under the guise of this argument that, And this is when the tide started to turn in favor of college football happening. This idea that the players are somehow safer if they are having football practice and games and they're in that structure, because otherwise they'd be out in the community with the rest of us who are at risk every day. Well, Trevor Lawrence still got it. Plenty of guys are still getting it. Now, maybe there's an alternate universe where there was no college football this year and the guys who are playing and coaching are getting it at a greater rate. But that argument, when the most prominent guy in college football and one of the best draft prospects since Andrew Luck gets it, it kind of undercuts the argument that playing college football makes these guys somehow safer. They're at risk wherever they are, whether they're playing college football or not. But it worked. It got college football back, even though college football clearly is having a harder time, Peter, than the NFL keeping it all together.
I think they're having a harder time because there's two reasons. Number one, their kids are 20 years old. Why does however many people at the University of Wisconsin, including evidently the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks on the team, all test positive? It's because, they don't have the same pounded into your head every single day that the NFL has. And the NFL even slips up. Even though they've been, I think, by almost all stretches, ridiculously good at not having guys test positive. But I think the biggest thing right now when it comes to Trevor Lawrence and all of these college players is that unless they are told at the end of the day that you go back to your apartment. I read last night that Trevor Lawrence lives alone. You go back to your apartment, have no contact with anybody. I'm just not sure it's realistic when you're talking to kids who are in college, Mike, if they don't have a literal bubble to go home to, that you're going to have a very pure season. I think you're going to have these little conflagrations, these little brush fires for as long as they try to play college football.
And there's a very simple reason for why that is, Peter. It boils down to the way that people that age are wired. And even though it was a long time ago for both of us, I can still vividly recall how I felt when I was that age. And there's an inherent selfishness to being 19, 20, 21. You want to do the things that you want to do. And when there are so many damn mixed messages out there about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in our society, the people who want to do the selfish thing don't need to go very far to find vindication and justification to do the selfish thing, whether it's all a hoax, it's all going to go away the day after the election, masks don't work, whatever you want to justify doing what you want to do, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds are susceptible to that. It's no different than the little kid who asks mom if he can do something, and mom says no, so he goes and he asks dad. And if dad says yes, good to go. And with something like this, you've got one parent saying no and the other parent saying yes, so the kids just listen to the one who's saying yes, period. That's why it's such a problem among kids that age, because there's enough out there where they can say, it's okay to do this. It's okay to do the things I want to do, and that's why college football's. And they're not getting paid either. Their paychecks aren't at risk like they are in the NFL. That's one of the reasons the NFL is holding it together. The players understand, at least I hope they do, that if games get canceled or suspended, they're not getting paid. For college players, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate for Trevor Lawrence. And look, in the very unlikely event that he would become seriously ill with this, but you don't know, because there are stories of 18, 20, 22-year-old people who get the coronavirus, who become extremely ill and or die. But again, Trevor Lawrence, this probably, on his way to the NFL will be a blip on the radar screen. It's a huge story today, but it's not going to have anything to do with what happens to either his draft status, or probably not going to have anything to do with how far Clemson goes this year, unless obviously he has more serious symptoms and this lingers for a long time.
What it does as a practical matter, it pushes down the stack the other big story from this week regarding Trevor Lawrence. He made those equivocal comments about going pro or coming back to Clemson, and it sparked this discussion of whether or not he would just look at the standings, look at the draft order, and say, see you next year, NFL. I ain't playing for the Jets. Well, Dabo Swinney, the coach of Clemson, from earlier in the day before any of this news got out, he addressed the possibility of Trevor Lawrence either coming back for another year or going pro. Here's Coach Swinney.
I'm going to save a scholarship for him just in case. But, I'm not real worried about it. He ain't worried about it either. He's got one thing on his mind, and that's leading the Tigers and having a great season this year. And we'll certainly let him stay if that's what he wants to do. But I'd be surprised if he's back with the Tigers next year. But who knows? You never know.
You never know. You never know. And look, Peter, you and I haven't talked about this.
He's got one thing on his mind, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's true. But
one thing on
again, those comments were before he found. And you know what, though? As of yesterday afternoon, if the timeline has any credence that they're trying to engineer to let him come back, when Swinney said that yesterday, Swinney knew that Lawrence was COVID positive, so he at least has two things on his mind. But Peter, you and I haven't discussed this. Look, I think that if he has any misgivings about throwing himself into the draft pool for 2021, I think before you go back and play another year at Clemson, what you do is you just sit out the whole year altogether and re-enter the draft pool in 2022 because you're still not going to get paid. Your draft stock isn't going to get any higher, and you get to roll the dice again. But the problem is, barring a trade, the team at the top of the draft order is there for one very important reason. It sucks. So you're always going to be faced with that. Joe Burrow was faced with that. And you and I both know Joe Burrow at least contemplated the possibility of trying to work the system and but it's too hard to do. You make too many people upset. At some point, you just have to submit. You're going to get $40 million fully guaranteed, and you submit. And you just hope that coaching staff, front office, teammates, there's enough there to allow you to flourish. And so far in Cincinnati, I don't know the answer to that question because it looks like Burrow's the only good thing they have going other than Joe Mixon. But I think, Peter, at some point, Trevor Lawrence just has to accept, I'm never going to escape this unless I sit out 2 full years.
Mike, the bad thing for Trevor Lawrence is that he's so good. And very, very rarely does somebody at the top of the draft, at the very top of the draft, enter a situation where it's possible to turn it around pretty quickly. Obviously Andrew Luck did in Indianapolis because they were down for a couple of years, but had some good talent. And again, I'm just reminded when you look at all this of how fortunate Patrick Mahomes was that the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid and Brett Veach fell in love with him and used a lot of draft capital to move up, I think, from 27 to 10 with Buffalo to get that pick, because that just simply does not happen very often. And just as Lamar Jackson was fortunate to be the 32nd pick or whatever he was, just as he was fortunate to be picked that low, it's the opposite end of the spectrum. You want to be the greatest guy. I hear guys every year saying, oh my God, it was my dream to be the first pick in the draft. Why? Other than the exaltation and the history, and on your Wikipedia page, it'll say you were the first pick of the draft. Big deal. Just really big deal. And you're much better off to either have your star tarnished a little bit coming out of college football so that you can go to a little bit of a lesser team, or to have a really good coach and a good organization fall in love with you and trade up. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that with Trevor Lawrence, but it's like you look at it, Mike. Okay, what would you rather do? Would you rather be on the New York Jets in 2021 or go back and be with, pick a team, the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2022? Does it really matter? Do you have a lot more faith in Jacksonville to be a playoff team in 2024 than you do the New York Jets? I mean, and you might. I don't know. Maybe Nick Saban becomes the coach of the Jaguars. I don't know. But the fact is, these guys who are truly great, transcendent college players are basically slapped in the face when they come to the NFL because they're going to go to a bad team and they're going to get the crap beat out of them for a while and maybe for their whole career. Archie Manning did. Joe Burrow is right now.
There's a factor that we're overlooking, and I'm disappointed I hadn't thought of this sooner, because we're very aware of it when it comes to player contracts, veteran player contracts. If the salary cap is only $175 million next year, that will affect the formulas that determine how much rookies make. So, I mentioned $40 million fully guaranteed over 4 years. Well, that's the track it was on, because Burrow got around $36 million, and it goes up every year because the cap goes up. Peter, that cap goes down. That 4-year fully guaranteed contract, if you start with 2021 with a salary cap of $175, that's not going to be the same dollars as maybe if you wait until 2022 when the pandemic is cleared, assuming that it does clear, assuming that full stadiums are permissible next year for the NFL, and at this point, who the hell knows? But that's a factor for Lawrence that wasn't there for any of the others, because the bottom line is you're going to get what you're going to get from whoever it is. Your financial package is going to be the same as the top pick. This is going to be the first time that financial package shrinks. So, again, it's just a factor, because maybe if you do sit out a year, you get more next year, and maybe next year you feel better about where you're going to go. But like you said, it's always going to be the worst team. Unless somebody trades up, it's going to be the worst team. And when you're such a great prospect, what's going to happen is what happened with the Bengals and Joe Burrow. They're going to ignore all offers. They're not going to care. Whatever the Dolphins wanted to give them, they weren't listening. They're taking the guy. And whoever has that first pick, whoever earns that first pick, whether it's next year or the year after, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence.
Mike, I think the one factor that you're glossing over in this particular case is that the vast majority of people who I've spoken to in the NFL think that this cratering of the cap for 2021 is not a one-year phenomenon. It's going to be not a lot higher in 2022, most likely. So if anybody who's advising Trevor Lawrence says, geez, it's only going to be $32 million over 4 years, or whatever, pick a number, I don't know. Next year, it really could be a lot higher. Well, next year, it might be $1 million higher. It's not worth affecting your decision. If you decide to go back, either because you don't want to play for the Jets or whoever has the number one pick or not. But I don't think the finances are going to be a whole lot different in 22 than 21, unless the TV contracts get signed and there is an absolute total pot of gold that pushes it from 175 to 230 in the first year of the new TV deals. But I think that's problematic too. That's a whole nother subject, but I think that's problematic as well.
Well, Peter, I think we can agree. We don't know where it's going in 2022. We know where it's going in 2021, and that's down the crapper.
Yeah.
2022, it's going to go up. The question is, how far does it go up? But it's going to be better in 2022. Again, it's just a factor to consider that no number one overall pick has had to consider in the past. And I mentioned earlier, and let's be clear on this, you can avoid the draft altogether if you sit out 2 full years. Nobody's ever going to sit out 2 full years. No college football, no pro football for 2 years. And even then, you would be an undrafted rookie free agent, and there would be limitations on what they could pay you for the first few years, and you would never get that pot of gold, however big or small it may be, until you get yourself in line for your second contract. So, as much as I love to see a John Elway or an Eli Manning story where a guy stands up and makes a power play, it's hard to do by way of sitting out. Now, Peter, and we need to take a break after this, but we can't rule out the possibility of Trevor Lawrence just simply making it known, I don't want to play for the Jets. I don't want to play for the Jaguars. I just don't want to do it. And I'm making it known I don't want to do it. Now, again, it's not the easiest thing in the world to pull off, but on the rare occasions when guys try to do it, it's worked.
It has. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, and how ironic would this be? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Trevor Lawrence says, I'm not playing for the Jets. I'm coming out, but if they draft me, I'm not showing up. And how ironic would it be if the Denver Broncos call the Jets and offer them 4 ones for that first pick in the draft? and John Elway becomes the mentor to one of the great college quarterbacks to come out since John Elway.
Well, and they're already saying that Arch Manning is going to pick his spot with Archie leading the way as he did for Eli, making it known where Arch doesn't want to play in 6 or 7 years when he makes it to the NFL. So, players have a lot more leverage when they realize, especially the guys at the very top, and maybe Lawrence is going to figure that out. Maybe that's the best play, not go back to Clemson, not sit out a year. Just use your leverage, and don't be afraid of the criticism you may get, because there's going to be people who support you. I know I will, because I think more and more guys should recognize that they shouldn't just blindly walk into this process, because you could end up with a bad coach, bad owner, bad front office, bad teammates, and your career gets derailed. And you never even had really much of a chance, and we see how it is in today's NFL. If you don't pick it up quickly, you're gone.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.